Thank you for standing by and welcome to the Paradigm Biopharmaceuticals Investor Webinar today, discussing the capital raising being undertaken by the company. All participants are in a listen-only mode. There will be an initial slide presentation lasting for approximately 20 to 30 minutes before we allow time to get through some Q&A. If you'd like to submit a live question, please do so using the Q&A panel within Zoom. Appearing on behalf of Paradigm today, we have the Chairman, Paul Rennie, CEO Marco Polizzi, Chief Medical Officer Dr. Donna Skerrett, and Director of Investor Relations Simon White. To begin, I'll hand it over to Paul. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Matt. And just by way of introduction, I was asked to say a few words in relation to the capital raise. But before I present the details of the capital raise, could I just maybe position the capital raise with a few comments so that we put this capital raise within context for our investors. So some people may think, why would we raise capital now? And as a lot of investors know, at our last quarterly webinar, we announced that we had 4 quarters of cash. So by definition, at the end of the next quarter, which will be the October report, it's very likely that we will be showing somewhere in the region of 3 quarters of cash. And I think people then understand that with 3 quarters of cash, you have to turn your mind to where is the capital then coming from. So again, in terms of context, let me just say that we know that the equity markets have been absolutely closed all of this calendar year 2022 for any capital raising, except and save for the last 6 weeks, where there has been a window of opportunity that has opened up. Now, that window of opportunity opened up at the same time as we got some inbound inquiries from existing shareholders who were inquiring about our cash needs and asking if we were fine for our capital, and if we needed to have any additional capital, we should speak to them. So we thought about this long and hard, and obviously, going back 6 weeks ago, there was no way that we really wanted to be raising additional capital at a discount to our share price, which had been fixed at around $1 to $1.05 for most of this calendar year. So since the downturn and the sell-off within the market, our share price, as investors would know, was unfortunately what we consider undervalued at around $1, and raising capital at a discount to $1 and having to tell investors that we were raising at 70 or 80 cents would have been an absolute disaster for us, because we believe the company is severely undervalued even at today's prices. So we also think that a strong balance sheet allows us, once we've raised this capital, to really accelerate and go forward with our 2 major priorities. One, which is executing on our clinical studies, and secondly is to try and secure a commercial arrangement for our second clinical program, which is the rare disease treatment of those patients suffering from MPS. We also consider that the dilution right now is modest compared to the value that we can create from running our programs at full speed and generating a partnering deal. Some might say, well, there's another option to say that you could have raised the money after the 008 results. But honestly, with the uncertainty in the market, who could possibly predict what the capital markets are going to be like in another 6 weeks from now? We may have faced a situation where the capital markets may have been closed again. We know that there is a lot of geopolitical uncertainty, and this may have contributed to institutional funds, again, closing their books, sitting on cash and not wanting to invest in companies. So we run the risk in terms of the market not being open again after 008. So this opportunity presented itself, and obviously from the board's perspective, we look at trying to make sure that we have a strong company, well-funded, and progressing towards the clinical trials and an outcome in our phase 3 clinical trial for all investors. And some might say, well, at the last webinar, we made some statements around our thoughts in relation to raising capital. And I certainly said that I was much of the opinion that I wanted the company to go through capital raising in a non-dilutive manner and raising funds by way of a commercial deal. And those priorities continue today. However, when we were talking at that time, or when I was talking specifically around wanting to do a capital injection into the company through non-dilutive funds by way of an upfront and milestone payments from a commercial partner, the markets were closed for raising capital, and we were certainly not going to be raising capital at under $1. I think shareholders would have been very disappointed if we'd taken that approach. So what we're looking at doing in terms of our future, we are looking to see if we can continue to try and do a commercial transaction on our MPS asset, and that will then obviously bring in non-dilutive funding. We hope the transaction will occur in calendar year 2023, and we do want to make sure that we can extend the runway from this capital raise into calendar year 2024 as much as we possibly can. And I must say that the company was founded on money from friends and family and retail investors. There's no doubt about that. And I still appreciate that to this day. And therefore, we want to reward those shareholders by way of a rights issue. So in terms of the rights issue, I'll explain the specifics on that in a little minute, but we do have to understand that we're getting a 1-for-15 rights issue and a top-up facility of 100% to participate at the same price as those institutional investors at $1.30. And some might say $1.30, why raise money at $1.30 when our last share price was $1.96? Well, I don't have to tell you, but most institutional investors don't look at the last share price. They look at an average over the last 30 days or 60 days, depending upon what their investment criteria are. So with the institutional investors, the discussion was around what is the 30-day VWAP price. So the 30-day VWAP price was $1.46, and that represented an 8.2% discount to come up with a price of $1.30. Not ideal, I understand that, but at the same time, investors don't want to invest at the last known share price. That is a given, and I think you find that most capital raises done in the Australian market always have some sort of discount to a 30 or 15 day VWAP. It would be, again, important to understand that a few months ago, we would not have had the opportunity to raise capital. And even if we did, it would be well under $1. So $1.30, I think, represents fair value within the context of the current situation, which is the war in Ukraine, the US inflation rates, and so on, that there are still very significant headwinds facing the equity capital markets. So we think $1.30 with a retail offer for all shareholders is a very attractive situation to be in. So the situation presented itself, and we have taken that. And again, we are making sure that all shareholders participate. And I'll now go into the details of the capital raise. So you know that Bell Potter Securities Limited acted as sole lead manager and underwriter to a fully underwritten capital raising, which comprises two parts. The first part is the institutional placement to raise approximately $45.7 million under Paradigm's existing LR 7.1 capacity. Secondly, a 1-for-15 pro rata non-renounceable entitlement offer of new fully paid ordinary shares in Paradigm to eligible shareholders to raise approximately $20.3 million. Now, just by way of process, that means that anyone who is on the register as a Paradigm shareholder as of 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Thursday, the 18th of August, you will be contacted by the share register, and you will have a personalised account of your shareholding and what you are entitled to in terms of the 1 for 15 pro rata offer, and you'll be able to make a decision to take up that offer, or you may wish to upscale to 100% of that offer, which will also be outlined in the booklet pertaining to the entitlement offer. So just again to let you know that the price that we're talking about, $1.30, is an 8.2% discount to the 30-day VWAP. And we may have some questions after the presentation which may pertain to the capital raise. They may pertain to other aspects of the business. But for now, I would like to hand over to my colleague, Marco Polizzi, who will take you through the near-term catalysts in relation to Paradigm's business. Thank you, Marco.
Thank you, Paul. Go to the next slide, please. And thank you, everyone. This is obviously a very exciting time for Paradigm as we ramp up the recruitment for our phase 3 clinical program, and we await the interim results of some of these other clinical studies that we've been working on. Speaking of which, I'm going to walk through some of these near-term catalysts that we believe will further demonstrate the effectiveness and safety of PPS in osteoarthritis. The most near-term catalyst will be the Para-OA-008 top-line data readout, which is expected in late September. This is an important milestone as it will give us some insight on what could shape our potential osteoarthritis labeling related to disease modification. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes, but I do want to touch on the highlights now. We will receive interim results in about 6 weeks, and then again in about 6 months and 12 months later. These are all interim readouts. The 3 key readout points will provide insight on PPS's effect on the knee joint in determining if it's expected to demonstrate disease modification for osteoarthritis, D mode as we refer to it. And if it does, and we believe it will, it takes this product from a home run to a grand slam. It would be the only approved D mode product ever approved, and it would most likely then become first-line treatment. And we're all very excited about this 008 study, obviously, and we'll be tracking that and progressing and offering updates as we get those. The next bullet point, in Q3 of 2022, we will receive preliminary data readout on our canine osteoarthritis study. That will give us some preliminary insight on the effect PPS has on the joints, including its impact on the bone, cartilage, and synovial within the knee. Para-002 update will provide us with interim thoughts on the safety of PPS for the first 117 patients that will be recruited in our pivotal OA phase 3 study. And Para-OA-006, the extension study, is expected to commence in Q4 of 2022. And this will give us some insight on the duration of effect. The next bullet point on the slide denotes the R&D tax rebate, which we expect to receive from the Australian government. And we expect that to be 6 to 7 million Australian dollars in Q4 of 2022, which will further add to our cash position and further extend our runway. We continue to pursue new IP for added protection for xylitol, and obviously we'll report on the progress as this occurs. However, we expect additional positive results from these efforts over the next 6 to 12 months. Paradigm's MPS-1 study has been selected to be presented at the International Conference on Lysosomal Disease in Sydney, Australia in Q1 of 2023. And we expect to continue to draw the interest of potential commercial partners through presentations at these prestigious conferences. And I'll update you a little bit more at a later bullet point on that. Next bullet point is in Q1 of 2023, we will also be presenting that 6-month data, as I mentioned, on Para-OA-008. And as I mentioned before, this will give us additional data on the trend towards that disease-modifying effect of PPS as measured by MRI analysis of the joint. As mentioned earlier in this slide, we were talking about the canine study, and by Q1 of 2023, we will have that 20-week follow-up on the study in dogs. 20 weeks of a dog's life is comparable to 3 years in a human. So this will give us insight on the likelihood effect PPS has on the human knee 3 years after administration. This study, we hope to learn the effect PPS has on disease progression. And then in the first half of 2023, we expect the dose selection of 002 to be completed. And then finally, we expect our ongoing discussions with potential partners for MPS will come to a resolution, and an agreement will occur sometime in 2023 to provide this additional non-dilutive funding from the expected significant upfront and milestone generated cash, as Paul had alluded to before. We've engaged in discussions and have companies in diligence, and will continue those discussions. And being in a stronger cash position will obviously increase our leverage in our negotiation with these partners. Now I'd like to speak to the next part of the slide here, the Para-08 008 phase 2 study. However, I don't want to steal too much of Dr. Skerrett's thunder. She's going to discuss this in much greater detail. But I did want to just talk about the top line results in September and what the study is. This is a biomarker study that will assess changes from baseline in multiple objective measures like serum and synovial fluid biomarkers measured from lab tests that are associated with disease progression of osteoarthritis. And what I'd like to share with you is what a positive readout could mean to Paradigm. First of all, it will give us early evidence of the potential for PPS to have the ability to modify the disease of OA. Again, this would be a huge upside for our product versus a pain and function indication only. I don't want to discuss these other points here, but because Dr. Skerrett will cover those off, but I did want to call out subpoint number 4. If Paradigm receives a D mode indication, it will most likely move this product from second line therapy to first line. And what that means is we could demand a much higher price point, 2.5 times the current estimate price, which means the price would go from $2,500 a treatment versus $6,000 a treatment. And we would expect significantly more market share as well, as it'll move to first line. So this also means the revenue for potential for PPS would likely be 3 to 4 times our current projections for the product. So obviously this is a very important study. And what I'd like to do now is turn it over to Dr. Skerrett, who could talk to you in greater detail about the progress that we've made and where we are with it. So Dr. Skerrett.
Thank you very much, Marco. So I'd like to speak briefly to this timeline that you see in front of you. I know many of you have seen this slide recently. I really just like to put this up to show the breadth of this OA program. We're currently in phase 3 for our pivotal study, and as soon as dose selection is completed, we will add the confirmatory study. And these 2 studies make up the data sets for the new drug application, which you see here timed for 2025. Once we have dose selection, we'll be looking to expand our label in the area of hip by conducting a controlled study in OA of the hip. And we'll also use the duration of effect data that we acquire from Para-006 and 7 in order to design a controlled study for the retreatment of OA to allow that language to be on our label as well. You also see on this slide that we have for the biomarker study that you just heard about, we have 3 readouts, the primary endpoint, which is the end of September, and then the 6 and 12-month follow-ups. And associated with those data are the canine study data. I'd like to say just one word before I move on to the next slide, and that is our NDA is planned for 2025. It will now be under the umbrella of the Fast Track designation, which we have shared with you previously. And this provides for us a very nice relationship with the FDA around our work going forward, and also an endorsement that not only is OA seen by the FDA as a serious medical condition with an unmet medical need, but also that Paradigm's program has the potential to meet that unmet need. Next slide here. So more follow-up around the disease modifying potential, because we're very excited to get the data readout in this program. And that's for the obvious reason that in addition to the very nice data that we've seen in pain and function in our trials, as well as in our very large SAS program, we know that the medical community is very interested in disease modification because there are currently no drugs available that alter the course of OA. And so by looking at the biomarker data at day 56, and that will be part of the top line at the end of September, we will explore the relationship between synovial fluid biomarkers, so that's markers of joint destruction in the knee itself, in the fluid in the knee, as well as those in the serum. Look for the correlations there, and especially expect to confirm some of the very positive findings we saw in our prior phase 2 program. We'll correlate this with clinical outcomes, and then at 6 months, we'll have structural changes evaluated through the MRIs. And this information will then be put together with the canine study to give us more information about mechanism of action, as well as the longer duration of effect, as you've heard about. We'll be able to model out what to expect in a human 3 years after their treatment course with PPS for OA. What does this mean overall? You've heard that the drug will be increased in price, obviously, for disease modification as opposed to pain and function, but you've also heard that for pain and function, our overall potential earnings are quite impressive and favorable for that label as well. You've heard also that xylosol will be available and more likely as a first-line therapy if disease modification is included in the label due to the data we acquire. But importantly, this will be the first clinical demonstration of disease-modifying effects of a drug in OA. We've seen non-clinical effects in disease modification. We've not seen them carry over into the clinic in association with the clinical effects on pain and function. So both of these are required for disease modification. So if a drug shows some effects in the joint, but it doesn't improve patients' symptoms, then it's not considered suitable for disease modifying label. So we're hoping to be the first to put these two together. We have every confidence based on our prior clinical trials, our large SAS program, as well as signals from our earlier phase 2 data on the disease modifying potential of this drug. I'll now move on to say a few words about our Mucopolysaccharidosis program. Next slide, thank you. So MPS is our phase 2 asset. It's a rare pediatric disease, which is associated with inflammation and ongoing musculoskeletal pain. The individuals affected with this disease have various enzyme deficiencies that are congenital. And from the time of birth, they develop the inability to break down certain sugars, and these aggregate in their organs, their joints, and in some cases, even the brain. This causes very early debility based on the MPS type, and prior to the availability of enzyme replacement therapy or bone marrow transplantation, many of these patients died very early in life. PPS has been evaluated in several MPS types now. MPS type 1, we have a study that is evaluating the use of PPS in patients who have undergone a bone marrow transplant. So despite having that transplant and having the ability to synthesize the enzyme due to that transplant, patients still have accumulations of these GAGs in their joints, and they have ongoing inflammation and pain. Our interim data were very promising in this area, and as you've heard, we'll be presenting these data at the International Conference on Lysosomal Diseases. This is a prestigious meeting occurring in Sydney early in 2023. Now, in addition to looking at patients who have had a prior bone marrow transplant, we have also an ongoing study in patients who are treated with enzyme replacement therapy. That is the MPS 6 protocol, which is a controlled trial that is enrolling in Brazil. It's over half enrolled. It's in Brazil, which is a part of the world that has large populations of MPS patients. And as you can imagine, as orphan indications, both the FDA and Europe have granted orphan designations to us for both MPS types 1 and 6 because these are very rare diseases. And clinical data are very rare in these diseases, and especially controlled trial data. So we're generating controlled trial data in MPS 6. The study's over half enrolled. Obviously, these kinds of clinical data sets are extremely valuable to potential partners, as are the benefits of the orphan designation. So for example, orphan designation in the US provides 7 years of market exclusivity. In Europe, it provides 10 years of market exclusivity. And there are also other benefits to having this designation. So the combination of the status, the rarity of the disease, and the quality of the clinical data that we're acquiring in these conditions, as well as the very promising results that will be have previously been presented in interim data and will be presented with final data, make a very nice package for potential partners. And that is very consistent with the interest that we have had in this MPS program with regards to partnering. I'll now turn over to the next slide for some summary comments from our chair, Paul Rennie.
Might be on mute.
Yes, thanks, Simon. I was on mute. I was trying to avoid sounds of the phone ringing and also shuffling papers. Yes, just wanted to provide a summary to the presentation, and that is that the company is a substantially de-risked phase 3 asset in a blockbuster indication. As you heard from Marco, top line revenues are going to be in the billions of dollars. So it truly is a blockbuster indication. As Dr. Skerrett said, fast track designation has been obtained for the osteoarthritis program, and that provides a number of benefits to the company. We do have a pipeline and we have a number of those indications which, like MPS, are gearing up for partnering opportunities while we retain all of the rights to the OA program right through to the end of phase 3. One of the major reasons for signing on Marco was his considerable experience in the pharmaceutical market. Marco has done many different transactions, and we're looking forward to him working with the rest of the team at Paradigm to execute on one of these commercial opportunities that we have outstanding at the moment. From Dr. Skerrett's presentation, hopefully you picked up on a number of clinical readouts and milestones over the next 12 months. The 008, or our disease-modifying study, will also provide, in addition to the biomarker data, WOMAC pain and function data. So investors will see a little look through to the phase 3 trial, where we'll be reporting on the pain and function of people with osteoarthritis versus placebo, and that will be very interesting data when that is released end of September, and then Q1 calendar year 2023, and then Q3 calendar year 2023, which will be the final reporting on that study, which will be the 12-month follow-up from all subjects in that study. The canine OA model, as Marco identified, is a very important study for us, which runs concurrently with the 008 study. It gives us a proxy into the likely disease modification at a time point like 3 years, which is only a 20-week follow-up in dogs because of their advanced aging process compared to humans. 008, the 6-month and 12-month data will be, the Para 008 6 and 12-month data will be reported throughout 2023. The MPS1 clinical data will be presented at the International Conference on Lysosomal Storage Diseases. And this is a very exciting piece of information for those people involved in the rare disease market. It's going to be very significant and quite groundbreaking, that particular study. And also we have the Para 002, which is our pivotal phase 3 study, the first data safety monitoring review and dose selection in the first half of calendar year 2023. So lots of news flow coming for investors, lots of very exciting opportunities to see how the programs are running and reading out, and that will continue throughout 2023. As also mentioned, we have partnering discussions on the MPS program ongoing, and obviously we look forward to working with Marco to bring that to a conclusion. And the pro forma cash as a result of this capital raise will see the company funded into 2024 with $108.5 million of cash. So with that, Simon, I think I can now conclude the presentation side of the business, and we can open up to any questions should any investors want to click on that icon and add a question.
Thanks, Paul. Obviously, there's been a lot of questions around, the timing of the raise so close to Para 008. I believe that question was answered at the start of the presentation, and just noting that this presentation will be recorded and will be available on the Paradigm website. So for those asking the question, I suggest once it's up on the website, you go back and have a look at Paul's explanation for that. Paul, a question for you from a shareholder.
Mm-hmm.
Why has the share price run so hard recently, in your view?
Well, thank you very much to the shareholder for the question. And look, I think there's a number of different factors. I think the first factor is after COVID, that Donna, Marco and myself were able to get out and see a lot of the investors in the Australian market. And we also did video conferences into the shareholders in Hong Kong. And I think this was the first time in a long time that we actually were able to see investors and probably reinforce the fact that this is a phase 3 asset. And I think when people understand that this is a phase 3 asset, even at today's prices, it's still, in our opinion, significantly undervalued. And I think if people look to other Australian companies or look to US companies who are in phase 3, they will generally see their market value is much higher than what we are talking about. I think the other thing that was interesting is that by doing these presentations and talking to people, there was some on-market buying of the stock, which came from a number of the institutional investors, and they were confident in the way that Paradigm is currently progressing, and the share price, because of the tight register and very little buying that had occurred in the last 6 months, really made the share price run. But I think it's the exposure to the current executives at Paradigm, that's Marco and Donna, and also an understanding it's a phase 3 asset, and everything, it has been substantially de-risked for investors. We've got through a phase 2 study, we've got through the FDA IND, we're now into an FDA approved phase 3 clinical study, which is the same study that's being run in other jurisdictions such as Australia, Canada, the UK, and soon to be Europe. So there's lots of positive things happening for Paradigm. And I think that's probably enough, Simon, to answer that question.
Thanks, Paul. Donna, we might switch to you. Question is, what gives the company confidence on the 008 clinical trial?
The 008 clinical trial was designed to look at biomarkers in the synovial fluid after we saw some very promising signals in the serum in our phase 2 trial. And so those serum markers or biomarkers showed us that PPS patients had lower evidence of destruction of the joint cartilage than the controls. So we clearly saw a difference between PPS and control patients on a number of different biomarkers that are associated with joint destruction, and PPS was always in the favorable direction, and the differences between PPS and the control patients were quite compelling and expected to be significant in a clinical sense. So based on that information, we also took a very careful look at the MRIs of knee patients in that same study, that phase 2 study previously conducted. And we saw that the PPS subjects had bone marrow lesions that were reduced compared to the controls. So these bone marrow lesions are known to be a marker for more severe progression of osteoarthritis and more painful osteoarthritis. And so this radiographic marker of more severe disease decreased in the PPS patients compared to controls. So we had a remaining question after looking at those two data. Were the levels of the biomarkers in the serum, are they the same as the knee? Because mechanistically, we would expect that they would reflect what was going on in the knee. And that piece of data we didn't have, so we acquired it by conducting this Para-008 study. So to answer the question of what gives us confidence, it's knowing that we've previously seen some very strong signals in 2 disease-modifying assessments in our prior controlled phase 2 study. And now we're looking at these again in a very similarly designed study. And then based on our consistent clinical effects through not only our controlled studies, but also our SAS program, we know that the responses to pain and function, the improvement that we see, lasts for a considerable period of time. We have SAS patients who come back after a year and say at this point they feel the effects are wearing off and they would like to be considered for retreatment. So that's a clinical indicator that we have something that's providing durable responses, and that would be expected to be associated with something that has disease-modifying potential.
Thanks, Donna. Staying with you for the next question, please. There is a question, how will the 008 top-line data be presented? And if the primary endpoints are not met, is there any benefit in continuing to provide 6-month and 12-month readouts?
All right, so the first part of that question, how will the data be presented? So we've worked with our statisticians to establish what the analysis plan will be for these data. So they will be presented as top-line data as described in the protocol, and that will include changes over time in serum biomarkers, in joint fluid biomarkers, and also the clinical responses in pain and function in the PPS treated patients compared to the controls. So the first set of data will tell us about biomarkers and clinical effects in PPS compared to controls. So to answer the second part of your question, why keep going if we don't see something with these biomarkers? We keep going because the disease-modifying effects are ultimately measured by what happens in the joint. And those findings will frequently are not apparent until several months after the PPS treatment. And that's just based on the detection methods in MRI, the level of sensitivity, and when we're able to see changes on MRI. So the MRI assessments have been done at baseline, and they will be conducted again at 6 months. So the stronger indication of what would correlate with disease modification would be demonstrated by anatomical changes in the joint, and that would be in the MRI data at 6 months. And just to follow on along to that, in addition to what we see clinically and what we see happening in the knee, it's very important to know what is the duration of this effect. And so the 12-month data from this 008 study will also be very valuable in terms of demonstrating for us the duration of effect in a controlled study.
Thanks, Donna. Marco, we'll switch over to you for this question, please. What, in your opinion, does an MPS deal look like?
Well, certainly it could vary based upon what the overall terms are, but we would likely be looking for some sort of upfront milestones that would compensate us for the risk and expense that we've devoted to the study. And then obviously there would likely be some sort of co-development sharing of the further investment for the phase 3 program. We certainly would strongly encourage the partner to allow us to manage the ongoing trials, since we have so much expertise and knowledge in that, and allow them to contribute through the funding of those milestones and payments to pay for it. And then certainly there would be a royalty on the back end, where when the product is approved, they would be responsible for the commercial investment to go out, commercial the product, sell it, and provide a royalty on either net sales or net profit, depending on how we want to structure it.
Thanks, Marco. I think a final question to finish, and this was covered in the ASX announcement today, but Paul, do you intend in participating in this offer?
Thank you, Simon. And the answer is yes. I think it's outlined in the ASX announcement, but I will be making, for what is for me, a substantial investment into New Paradigm shares. I have had a couple of text messages during the presentation, Simon, asking about how do I go about obtaining my rights. So can I just, again, I mentioned at the outset in the introduction, shareholders don't need to worry as long as they're a shareholder by 7 p.m. Eastern time on this Thursday. They are on the register. They will be receiving a personalised booklet which outlines all the details in terms of what that pro rata means in terms of their shareholding. It will be calculated at the share price of $1.30. And then there will be an additional piece of information about upscaling to 100% of their allotment, and all of that will be set out in a booklet. So investors don't need to make any further inquiries. They can just wait until Thursday and let the process proceed, and they will be notified and they will have the option to take up their shares. But if they haven't received any notification by the middle of next week, not this week, but the middle of next week, they're always welcome to contact the company, and an update will be provided for them. But all of that should be well and truly organised through Computershare. So those statements will be going out as of later this week.
Thanks, Paul. I think that will conclude the questions. If anyone still has any remaining questions, you feel free to email the investor relations email, and I'll respond as quickly as possible. So thank you. And back to Matt.
Thanks, Simon, and thanks to Paul and Donna and Marco for the comprehensive update regarding the capital raising today. That concludes today's Paradigm Biopharmaceuticals investor webinar. Thanks again to everyone who joined the session for participating, and we'll look forward to updating you next time around. Goodbye for now.
Thanks, Matt.